Well, today I'm talking with Warren Buckley. Welcome, Warren.
Oh, thank you very much, Paul. Good to meet you.
It's great to meet you too. We've spoken a few times via the internet and messenger, but never in face to face.
No, first time.
But the wonder of Zoom is that we can get to speak across the world without having to actually leave the house. That's the main thing from my point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. Same here. I think we're probably a fair distance between us anyway.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, Warren.
Yeah. So yeah. Look, my name is Warren Buckley. I work essentially in an area of sort of applied science. It's around data science and decision intelligence. So I have immersed in that sort of scientific kind of realm most days of my work. I'm more on the commercial side than I am actually in doing the work itself. But most of my colleagues that I have to work with have got scientific, technical backgrounds ultimately. So, but even though I have that very scientific background, I'm a curious person, and I think I'm pretty open-minded. So if I if I see something that I think is of interest, regardless of whether it's something very tangible or intangible, then yeah, I'll certainly prepare to look into it. And that's probably why we're having this conversation, Paul, which is, probably, I've been pretty interested in most things sort of paranormal since I was probably about 11 years of age, on and off, and then about 18, 19 years ago, I sort of, my curiosity got piqued, and I became quite interested, predominantly in the mediumistic angle of things, and subsequently started to read lots of books, looked into the subject matter. I was very graciously, I was offered, invited to join a development circle, so I participated in that as well. So, um, but always, whilst always being open-minded at the same time, always an element in my brain which is quite analytical. It sort of says, okay, am I thinking this? Is this true? Am I really getting this right? You know, Probably more actually against myself than sometimes than the people I kind of worked with in that development circle. It's probably quite critical of myself, thinking, am I imagining this essentially? But there were things and events that essentially certainly have happened, and certainly in my interest in this, um, I ultimately, started to look into the physical mediumship aspect, and I was very keen to participate in a séance if as and when one maybe became available to me.
They're quite rare to find, aren't they? That's the
Yeah,
difficulty with it.
that's
But
the challenge. Yeah.
what about a family background of open-mindedness or religion? Does anything in the
Yeah,
family
so
come
I mean,
from
I'm
that?
not. I wouldn't classify I'm certainly not into organized religion necessarily. I was brought up in C of E, a sort of background, but I probably, if I'm honest, I sort of dropped it by about 19 years of age. Kind of didn't really want to rock up on a set on a wait of a Sunday morning to me at that age. But my parents were quite into church to a certain extent. My mum was very open-minded and very into the sort of spiritualist aspect and stuff like that. I think there was a bit of confliction there because I think there was a bit of Catholicism in that as well as her interest in there. But I think she just, she got older. She became much more okay with the whole matter, and I know she had quite an interest into it, and certainly had a number of readings over the years.
Yeah, I find Catholics quite open actually because they've got a very strong belief in heaven, haven't they?
Mm,
So the only difference between us and the spiritualists and Catholics is the fact that we know that we can talk with said people.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we've got
definitely.
this a shared interest in physical phenomena, and we've attended physical seances. And one of those seances we both attended is with David Thompson,
Mm.
but I don't think we were there on the same occasion.
I don't believe so. I don't
Mine
believe
was
so.
up in the borders of Wales and England, up Shropshire way by Welsh Pool. So you definitely didn't get attend that one.
I was down in Kent at
Right.
the Banyan retreat.
Oh yeah, you did say Banyan, yeah. So you've heard my testimony there on the video that I made,
Mm.
which I'd written out the testimony and then read it out for the video. What was your experience of a David Thompson seance?
Yes, I think if I remember right now, I did actually have a hunt for emails because I was trying to remember what year it was that I went there, but I think it was 2016. I think it was somewhere around about, I can't remember what it was, but somewhere in 2016. David was obviously clearly here in the UK, as probably many viewers know. He resides in the southern hemisphere somewhere, and um, I think I'd seen something on the Banyan retreat, and I inquired whether they would be prepared to allow me to join, given that it was the first time. And I know that often, there's an element of trust that has to be built up for people to participate in the seances. But Nick got back to me and he said that they were willing to for me to come along, which was really great news. I was quite excited about it. I remember driving down. I hit this awful traffic jam. I ended up calling them saying, "I think I'm going to be late. I don't think I'm going to make it." And they were great. Nick was really great. He said, "Oh, look, if necessary, we'll hold off for a little bit longer. Don't worry about it." So I did make it in time, thankfully.
Yeah,
Um, Ultimately down there, because it was quite a journey for me because I'm up in the Midlands somewhere. And I got down there. I was probably a little bit flummoxed, to be honest with you. It was like, a little bit, bit, a bit energized by it all. And they said, "Would you like to?" We selected you as one of the people to go and check the room, and essentially, and I was like, "Wow, hang on! I've just driven for about 3 hours. I'm." So I did pull myself together, and I thought, well, I need to do a really good job of this, and that analytical part of my brain kicked in. Um, and that the particular room they use is it's quite large in Banyan, and it's very stark in there as well. So the good thing, which is a good thing actually, because the walls are all a very pale color, ceiling was pale, and they'd obviously fairly recently had some new flooring put in. It was that the laminate floor,
yeah,
and I know with that stuff, you can't. It has to butt up correctly, doesn't it? So it's easy to check if there's any, if you're skeptical about, well, trap doors and all that, it's going to show up in that stuff because you can't disguise it. And it wasn't. It was completely and utterly uniformed. I remember looking at the ceiling, remember looking at the walls, and then I obviously sort of my eye caught the cabinet. And I thought, well, I really should go and have a look at that and have a look at the chair as well.
yeah,
And I think there were two or three other people as well who were doing exactly the same thing as I was. So I went and I had a look at the cabinet. I mean, the cabinets, and there's not much to them. I don't know what I expected ultimately, but it really is three sides of wood, a curtain, and there's no top. Just a rail at the top, basically, which helps to keep the shape, and obviously so you can pull the curtain across. And I had a good look there. And I looked at the chair as well. I gave the chair. The chair was quite an oldish chair. Ultimately, big sort of comfy chair. But I had a look at it, and I made sure that it was, rigorous, and it was all, nothing slotted in and out.
yeah,
To my best of my knowledge. There was one door in that room as well, which is to the back. I went and had a look at that. It was locked. Ultimately. Um, but I don't think it was, I don't think I was not particularly perturbed by it, being that was there. Um, yeah, I think I pretty much satisfied myself that, the room itself was, secure ultimately.
yeah. I had that role as well. One thing in hindsight, I didn't look under any chairs right around the room, and there must have been 40 odd, maybe more, people sitting
Mm,
on chairs, some of which were Australians that came with him or he knew them.
yeah.
So I was with his wife at that time. Don't know if she's around now.
Right. Yeah. I don't, so I didn't. I remember. I think his. I think it. Then. I think maybe his wife was there, and I think there was one of the members of the Banyan community who knew him quite well. I can't remember her name now. I think blonde lady. Who I think is, if I remember rightly, is a medium in her own right. Um, but yeah, I think I remember also I had to take my shoes off as well when I entered that room, and then we had to come back out again, and then everybody was then invited to go back in, but then you had to take your shoes off, your belt, watches. I think certain parts of jewelry as well had to go off, and then they actually metal detected everybody as they one by one as they went into the room.
Yeah,
Um, and I, whilst I um, obviously understand that that was, for very much the benefit of the medium in terms of protection. Um, from my side, it was like, okay, well, they're being really thorough themselves here about making sure that that people aren't taking things in that they shouldn't necessarily. Because I think even any metal items, I think my car keys had to leave out and stuff like that.
yeah,
So everybody got, and as I say, everybody was in the stocking feet. Ultimately, we all had, so which is kind of important actually for the story kind of going on, because
right.
I'm sure you had this a very similar experience. And so everybody took their seats, and I remember um, I was sort of on. If David was looking out from the cabinet, then I would have been on the right hand side. It was like a horseshoe shape, and I would have been just slightly less than halfway up, you know, that point. Um, and I think that, yeah, I think that was pretty much, really sort of then kind of got, and then I got asked essentially then to go and, whether I would basically go and help tie David into the seat,
Yeah,
which is another shock actually as well, because hadn't anticipated that as my first go. It's like, hang on, don't you have to do so many of these before you get asked these? So there was a bit of kind of trepidation, but at the same time, there's another part of me saying, oh, well, this is kind of good actually, because this is completely what I want to be able to do. I want to
yeah,
satisfy myself
yeah,
that he, that all things are secure here. And and for me, that was really important that the medium was tied into the chair ultimately. I think
yeah,
that was a critical importance for me, knowing that being able to just simply freely walk around was not was a very would be at the best a very difficult operation to conduct. So I ended up taking the legs, and I got handed the cable ties, and they're quite thick ones. They're the 10 millimeter ones as well. They're not thick, the thin ones. And so I put those on. I made sure that obviously I didn't cut off his blood supply, but at the same time I did make sure they were quite tight. Um, and then I decided that then I would cut them in a shape that would be very difficult to replicate for anybody to replicate. So I cut them in a V shape. And anybody who knows when you cut plastic, particularly that thick, it was quite difficult actually. I had a pair of scissors and I was really having to really cut them quite hard. So they weren't uniform shapes. And the way that plastic deforms as well, I knew that I would be able to check because I kept the two ends
right.
with me. I would be able to check at the end that they were the same cable ties. They put the cardigan on him. They zip tied the buttons and the holes and everything with the cardigan. They were slightly thinner cable ties. They cable tied his arms, wrists down to the onto the arms of the chairs, and then we were invited basically to go and they gagged him as well. He was had a gag
Yeah. I don't
with
think
me.
they gagged him with me, but I saw him on the TV the other day with on the BBC program about Helen Duncan, and
Right.
he was gagged in that. I
Oh,
don't
did
think
he?
it was
Yeah.
when I saw him.
Yeah, they gagged. I remember the time kind of gagging because it didn't look like very comfortable.
Oh.
Ultimately, I thought, they look quite tight. Um,
He was definitely cutting into his lip.
yeah, just not. It wasn't an easy thing.
No.
You certainly couldn't talk normally in there. It seems to be that you're right. I think it seems to be there are different. I know I've read certain experiences of his before, and there appear to be times when he wasn't gagged and was gagged because he seems to have given some introduction initially, but he was certainly not in a position to give any introduction or talk to anybody with this gag in his mouth. Um, yeah, and then they sort of explained what would take place. They said that everybody would link hands, and the reason for that would be so that if there was a break in the hand, then you were asked to basically call it out. And again, whilst they're talking got it from a protection of from the medium perspective, understandably, to my brain it's like, oh great, excellent, then nobody can get up and do anything because because I'm there's that analytical piece kicking off in me.
Yeah.
So and then they said it would obviously be done in darkness, but that they did have a red light. It was quite a bright red light. It wasn't super dim. When they put it on, you could see, but they would use that at certain intervals when it was safe to,
Right.
because of some of the phenomena that was taking place. And I think it also avoided anybody having to get up and down
Yeah.
as well. So there were two people as well from the Banyan retreat. The lady I was referring to, blonde, there was another gentleman. They were the nearest to the cabinet ultimately. And then essentially the lights went on, and there was a bit of singing, as I recall. I have no idea what we sang, but but it was probably bottles of beer, or whatever it was, something that everybody just knew and could easily join in on to get the vibration up. Um, and then there was a voice. I think there was a voice, and then somebody said, asked, is that you, William? Who is it? I understand eventually David's one of David's guides, um, and he's basically. I just remember there was some conversation, but there were two things kind of interesting about that. One was as he walked around, you could hear that it was definitely shoes of some sort,
Yeah.
and because it just you can't replicate that in
No.
stocking feet.
So as
I
far as
don't
you
care what
could
he
tell,
says,
there was no shoes in the room.
but there's no shoes in the room because we've all
Not
been
even
asked
on
to take them
David.
off. And it's not
Yeah.
big shoes are not something you can smuggle about your person
No.
necessarily easily, are they, to a room?
No.
So there was that, and they said that also for everybody obviously to remain with their hands together, and that you know that William would come around and touch you on the head. Apparently he had big hands. He would touch you on the head, but if you didn't like that, then you didn't have to say it. You just had to think it. If you were not comfortable about it, just think about it. Just say, I'm not comfortable with it. I was quite comfortable for that to happen.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you the difference whether he had a big hand or a little hand because it's not a. I just didn't have any frame of reference ultimately. That's all. But I was certainly up for having that happen with me. Um, and then there was there was some of the bits and pieces and stuff like that. And then I think um, I think it's Timothy came through ultimately. Who seems, and I think there was a bit more singing ultimately that we had again to sort of pull that vibration up. I remember there was a basically Louis Armstrong came through, which was kind of like a bit of a surprise because I had not appreciated ultimately that might happen. And there's always, and I've got I have a natural sort of skepticism when there's a kind of celebrity kind of thing. But I do know the irony is I do like Louis Armstrong music. I own certain pieces of his music. I've got an LP and stuff like that, so I'm familiar with the voice,
Yeah.
and I know it's a really difficult thing to pull off. I can pull it off for about maybe 10 seconds maximum on a sing song. By that time, my throat's gone dry. God knows how the guy actually sang. So there was him singing. I think "Hello Dolly" I think was the song, and there was everybody was, and there was some word, and spoke a little bit and stuff like that, and there was some words, and then Timothy came back in again, and he said, "We have somebody here," and I think this for me, this was the kind of like this was really it was an interesting piece, and I can't remember the individual's the entity's name, and it's
No.
not important anyway. But it was a man that I would say would be sort of late 20s, in their 30s, early 30s or something like that, who had obviously left this earth at a relatively young age, and and I think there was a call out. Does anybody know such and such? And there were two of the audience basically said yes. And it turned out to be a mother and sister, and then the entity basically I mean, I haven't mentioned the fact, David is ectoplasmic, isn't it? So you can hear
Yeah.
this noise, this kind of odd sort of sucking, burbling noise going along. And the noise basically transforms, but over by where you can hear their voices.
Yeah.
And there's a conversation that takes place, and they clearly recognize. I think that's the big thing here, is that they clearly recognize. I mean, they're in tears.
Yeah.
They're quite
Yeah.
clearly upset.
Yeah.
In probably overwhelmed, joy, sadness, whatever, the whole lot probably thing. But they're having a conversation. You couldn't hear everything that he was saying. He was struggling to say, but he was near enough them for them to hear everything he was saying. And they were, and he wasn't there for very long, but he was. I the fact that it was his voice and the way that they responded suggested to me that they did recognize it, and it was a voice that they clearly recognized belonged to son, brother,
Yeah.
or those two
Yeah.
ladies.
Yeah. That happened in the seance I witnessed. It was a Scottish gentleman,
Hmm.
and you could hear him go across the other side of a really big room, and he found the people that he wanted
Yeah.
straight away. Stood in front of him, and as you say, I don't know if I can remember hearing everything that was said, but they seemed to totally recognize and believe it was the person.
I mean,
Uh,
that's the thing as well, is what you have to understand as well is that, I'm sure the same with you, is that the room is pitch black. There's no windows actually
Pitch
in that
black.
room,
Yeah.
Damien. So
Yeah.
you can't see anything. You can't see
No,
your own hand
no,
in
but
front of your face.
that Scottish gentleman went straight to the two Scottish women over the other side
Yeah.
in the pitch black room. So
Yeah,
that's
these ladies were clearly
yeah,
from the south of England, judging from their accents, um, as well. So, and the yeah, the spirit coming through had a very similar accent, or
yeah,
that I would recognise as a Kent southeast sort of accent. Um, so yeah, so it was quite remarkable. This is all going on in utter pitch black. It doesn't get any darker than that.
no,
Um, and I think so. Also, what I probably forgot to say as well was that during the seance there were a couple of situations where David was basically transformed with chair into the middle of the room. And when I say the middle of the room, if you'd have drawn a dissecting line on that horseshoe for them, it was literally dropped in the middle of the room on both occasions. Um, and they would put the light on. It was bright. It was a red light, but it was bright enough for you to see who it was, that they were there, that the ties were still all in place
in the
and
chair.
such. And then,
Remove the chair as well.
yeah, in the chair. I mean, just that chair was not the chair was a big chair. It wasn't something you could easily move around. Certainly not with a with a man in who was tied in there. It would take probably two biggish guys to be able to do something like that. So it was, even if you just slid it, you wouldn't be able to hear that. And it was, and you could hear everything anyway, because the thing is that people don't realize is your senses are really heightened. Your hearing's like you hear the slightest move of anything,
Yeah,
because you're literally only dependent on that sense.
yeah,
So you'd hear anything. So and you just didn't hear anything until you got this drop of the chair into the middle. Um, and then at the end, I think it was at the very end, David was dropped again in the middle. But then he had his cardigan was on back to front. And I know that sometimes has been done before, essentially, but that was quite interesting
Yeah.
to do. And I said, well, say the end. That he was then they took the light off. He was then put back into the cabinet. The cardigan was put back around the right way this time, if I remember rightly. And then we were invited ultimately to go and do our checks again, and then also cut the cable ties. So the other people that would participate that with me, they obviously did the arms and they did the cable ties around the cardigan, and it was quite a tight fitting cardigan as well. People should know it wasn't some loose fitting thing that you could easily get over your head.
No.
And then I took obviously the ones from around his ankles, and
And
I
his
had a look at the
ankles.
chair and stuff like that, and then I got my two pieces out, and and I made sure that there was no two ways about it. You only one fit into one, and the other one fit into the other, and they were like a perfect match. And it was like, okay, well,
They
for
were the
me
ones. Yeah.
personally, it was like, okay, I've appeared to have experienced
Yeah.
some genuine, quite extraordinary phenomena here.
And did they use a trumpet waving it around or?
I don't believe they did
Okay.
with David. No, I don't think that. I don't recall that.
And what about apports? Any apports?
No, no apports.
Okay. One other thing. Um, the red light was on when the chair was put into the middle of the room during the seance.
Hmm.
Was it switched off then? And or how did the chair get back into the cabinet? Did they lift it up or
No, no, it would
lift it up or
always
put it?
be. It would. So they would ask permission basically. They would ask permission for basically to put the light on.
Yep.
And they wouldn't do that until the guide said yes. And I think that was Timothy that made that call.
Right.
You can turn the light on now. Light would come on. David would be out in the middle of the floor. They would then There'll be a bit of a conversation, not very long, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. Light would go back out. They would go back into the cabinet, be given, then basically the Timothy would come through and say, you can switch the light on again, put the light on. You could see that David was back in the cabinet,
Yeah. So as
in
far
the
as you
chair.
know, spirit people dematerialized him, rematerialized him, or whatever, floated him maybe. You don't think that there was any human on the earth plane picking him up, moving him
Like
there?
I said, the thing is, it was a sturdy chair. It was
Yeah,
a big
would
sturdy
be quite
chair, so it
heavy.
wasn't
Yeah,
light.
yeah.
Um,
So, what about him doing it? He couldn't have done it if he strapped
well,
him in a chair.
it would be quite a feat.
Yeah,
How do you? I mean, you'd have to. I I think it would be impossible for him to do it in ties. So therefore, you'd have to slip out the ties,
yeah,
sort of then walk turtle-like to the middle
yeah,
of the floor.
yeah.
Ultimately, put the chair down and quickly slip his feet back into the ties. It's just an ex. I think it's just too. I think it's
Complicated.
just too
You'd have to be
extraordinary.
a magician,
It's one
wouldn't
of
it?
those things you could
Yeah,
hypothesize
yeah,
that it's all possible.
yeah.
I'd really like to see somebody who
Somebody do it.
actually try
Yeah.
and do it.
Oh no,
Yeah.
it's
Good luck to you. Good luck to you, please. Yeah.
from my
And in pitch
recollection.
black.
Yeah, from my recollection, the chair when it was put into the centre of the room, they had a block of wood, 8 foot by 4 probably, on the floor for him to land on because they didn't want the floor damage, and it came down with such a crash. But he didn't do it. He didn't go back into the cabinet on the seance I saw.
Right.
So he was. It was at the end, chair into the middle, lights on, more or less, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Cardigan the back way round. Wasn't turned round again afterwards either. So from your point of view, spirit people must have somehow put him back in the cabinet. He couldn't have done it himself, and nobody else. Everybody should have been holding hands. Nobody else could have done it.
I just don't. I don't. I sort of came away, as I said, I came away from that feeling essentially that I had witnessed some extraordinary
What
phenomena.
phenomenal. Yeah,
I didn't feel that it I just think it would be an extraordinary accomplishment by one human being to be
Yeah,
able to do
do that
to
one.
do
Yeah,
to try and fake that. And
yeah,
I I just don't think it was possible in with him being up, in the way that he was tied in there, he was
yeah,
gagged. The gag, because that was the thing as well. The gag was always on.
yeah,
There was never the voices that came through were clear as day.
yeah,
There was no, well, it's like how ventriloquist, you can
yeah, yeah.
you can't you just it just wasn't. It was just
No.
completely clear.
Well, a ventriloquist may be able to do Louis Armstrong, but I don't see how they could do your relative,
Yeah,
such
not gagged
as
either. I haven't
you.
seen a ventriloquist
Yeah,
actually do it whilst they're
would have been
gagged.
gagged. Yeah, and I know Leslie Flint used to um, drink a cup of blue water, stained water.
Yeah, well, he was massively he underwent quite a lot of scientific study, didn't he, in
Yeah,
lab
yeah,
type conditions, and they used to measure the water
yeah,
coming back out to make sure that none of it, he hadn't lost any of it whilst doing it. They had certain tolerances that they were prepared to
yeah.
accept, and as far as I know, they never ever questioned. There was never any
No, and they'd take his
questioning
mouth
about that.
over, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
But he did his seances in the light. How big a gap do you think from the center of the room back into the cabinet and the light back on again? So light off, light on when he's in the center of the room, light off in the cabinet, light on. How long do you think that gap was?
Um, we're talking seconds.
Well,
As in, we're talking we're talking about maximum of 5 seconds between those intervals. That's very demanding to basically. I mean, yeah, so it's not it's done quite quickly
mm,
ultimately. And again, the thing is, it's accompanied by the voice.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the voice tells you when, obviously giving the instruction when the light can come back on again. And David's there, and he's got the gag. His hands are clearly, his wrists are clearly still cable tied to the chair. So are his ankles. His his cardigan's obviously still there. I think, and he's still got the gag on.
yeah,
Ultimately,
yeah,
and it's still, that gag was still as tight on as it was at the very beginning. There was no, it didn't loosen because you could, he obviously did. It was uncomfortable for him because when they undid it,
yeah. Left a
um,
mark usually as well.
yeah,
Yeah,
he was clearly,
yeah.
trying to,
Get his lips.
just relax his
Yeah.
jaw a bit.
But from the TV the other day, they were cutting right into his cheeks.
Really,
Yeah.
wow.
Um, how do you suppose the spirit world did that then, if you were to hazard a guess?
I Yeah, I suppose I mean, to me, there's two options. One is it's a dematerialization type situation, or there is a levitation
Yeah,
type
yeah,
activity. They're the two that probably spring to mind to me.
yeah. I mean, Daniel Dunglass Hume was renowned for levitating out of a window, a second or third story building, round the outside of the building, 2 or 3 stories up, and then back in again from the other side. So I've seen levitation or read about it, sorry, in various older books,
Mm,
but there's not a great deal of it takes place in the modern world. We did see it in our local pub one night, but it only briefly lasted marginal seconds. And to me, I was checking his hands that he didn't touch the walls because he was in a passageway when we saw it, Margaret and myself. But it looked as if he was coming down off a step. But that was only seconds, literally
mm,
1 or 2 seconds. There's another possibility is that they've levitated him, but just slid the chair across the floor. I've seen
yeah.
that one in film. There's the physical seances I used to attend over in Clevedon. The lady who runs them put a video up of one of her other mediums, not the one I used to visit. I did visit this other medium once or twice. Did everything in the light, and predominantly they controlled him, so he would be dancing, some remarkable dancing, because he was heavier than me and more asthmatic than me and a heavy smoker. So he shouldn't have been able to do what he was doing for two
Yeah,
hours. But he was in the chair in the video, and the chair just slid across the floor quite
right.
slowly, without any fanfare, no scraping whatsoever. Couldn't see his feet in the video, but he wasn't moving. So how do you move a big chair like?
That would suggest to me, though, still levitation, but
Yeah,
marginal.
yeah,
It probably maybe is only because they couldn't have done that. Like I said, you were so acutely aware of any noise
yeah,
that was taking place in that room on that evening that even if they'd put felt pads on the bottom, you'd have heard it
yeah.
gliding across. And there wasn't that at all. There was every time it was utter silence, and then bang, the chair
Yeah.
would land on the floor.
Well,
Um,
that took ages on that video for it to move across. So I
mhm.
don't think that was the way they did it. But dematerializing and rematerializing sounds so totally impossible. And yet I've got two books. The one by Louis uh, Harris, about
Mhm.
Alec Harris's mediumship. If you read that book, she describes where he was dematerialized upstairs and
Yeah,
rematerialized outside the back door. And then another book, Alan House's book, 60 Years a Spiritualist. Lo and behold, he says the same thing. Totally different medium, totally different part of the country. Exactly the same situation of there's the man in front of you in the cabinet, 1 second, and then he's gone, and then he's knocking on a padlock door, asking to be let back in.
yeah,
So
yeah. I think. I mean, I know that obviously, like you say, in modern times, it that phenomena is less likely, or has been less likely to a certain extent, hasn't it? And certainly in anything but um, a dark room, a pitch black room, ultimately. I'm not sure why that is. I know there's some hypotheses about, whether how much time we spend in modern times in this, and how we build up that, but we build up that kind of those power, and those, enough power basically to help spirit ultimately do that. But
mm,
for me, yeah, I don't know is the honest answer.
yeah,
I think spirit would probably know more inclined to know what the answer is there than we do.
yeah. Where do you stand on the blacked out seance then, in terms of in the David Thompson seances, they call the spirit people who walk around full formed materialized spirits because you can feel the hand on your head as being materialized. Do you agree that that's a full formed materialized spirit if you can't see it?
Well, it might only be part formed because I can't see it.
Yeah. It might have just formed
Ultimately,
the hand or the
yeah,
feet.
yeah, it might be even just the feet and the hand.
Yeah.
Who knows in that kind of cartoon sort of sketch
Yeah.
ultimately. It does. There's obviously a presence there. When they're standing, when William was standing in front of me, there's that kind of element of you as a person, isn't there? That there's a presence there. And you find that even in real life, where you've got your eyes closed, something like that, you're aware that somebody's nearby to you, even though you can't hear them.
Yeah.
So I think that there's obviously clearly something, whether they have basically they've using the ectoplasm to give a full form, or whether they can just simply don't have to do that because the spirit entity is sufficient anyway. They're already giving that, emanating that kind of electricity, ultimately, whatever it is. Um, I don't know. I think that's, it's again, it's a bit of a hypothesis. Ultimately, you'd never be able to really test it out. I suppose you could ask spirit as to whether that's what they ask, how they
Yeah.
present themselves, or failing that, then you are relying on either a daylight situation or um, some sort of infrared
Yeah.
thermal imaging camera or something like that technology.
I don't know if you could call that full form materialization, though, unless you could see it, like Alec Harris's seances, they say about Helen Duncan's, countless others.
Yeah, Minnie Harrison as well,
Minnie
didn't she?
Harrison, yeah,
Obviously, she did
yeah,
that stuff. Yeah,
yeah.
that
No,
kind of
they are definitely full form materializations because you see
yeah.
them.
Yeah, well, they were permitted to take um, infrared photos, weren't they, in the Harrison?
Yeah, I can't. Well, I had the book, and we had Tom and Anne stay with us once, but for the life of me, I can't remember.
They had there's a in the book there's a
Did
clear
they?
picture of Aunt
Yeah,
Ag.
I've seen the pictures, but
Yeah,
were they seeing Aunt Ag regardless of the infrared camera? I think they were,
I
but
think there might have been some
yeah,
slight red light in there.
yeah. But they could definitely see the full form materializations in Alec Harris's. So
Mm,
I've interviewed a couple of people who, yeah, you see it plain as day.
yeah.
And so I would agree that they are full form materializations. But
The only other ones I'm aware of um, are the ones that happened at Scole.
right,
So I know the medium that I sat with. Um, I we often had chats after um, each develop session, go and have a cup of tea and stuff like that. And I remember I think I'd just finished reading the Scole Experiment book,
right,
and she said that she'd been invited and had participated. She knew Robin Foy.
yeah,
Um, so she went and had a conversation. She explained to me she saw spirit children down at her feet. They were completely illuminated. Uh,
well,
so even though they were, because it was down in the cellar, so
right,
pitch black,
yeah,
often they would start in, but then different type of approach, wasn't it? In Skull, it wasn't ectoplasmic. It was a different type of energy. But she said that she saw fully formed children at her feet.
and you were talking to her face to face, or is this what you read in the book? I can't
No,
remember.
this is face to face.
Face to
This is
face,
the medium
right?
I
Oh,
sat with
excellent.
in the development circle.
Yeah. Robin Foy was he the only one, or was there more? It was he the leader, or was it,
Yeah, Robin
he
was
had a
the leader
circle of them, I
ultimately. There
think.
was his wife as
His
well that
wife as well, yeah.
participated, and then they had
Right.
Skull was quite interesting because they invited so they invited people from the science community and
Yeah.
also from the magician community as well. So there were a number of
Oh,
magicians that would come along who were very, obviously clearly open-minded, but basically were there largely to say, look, there's no way that you can replicate this,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
not without having a George Lucas type sort of budget. Um, and even then it would have been impossible. I've seen some interesting testament. There's one on YouTube. There's a physicist that went and he talks about holding one of the spirit lights in his hands. He said he didn't think he didn't ask permission. It only occurred to him afterwards that he might should have asked permission. But he said it had mass. He clearly said it states. He said I could feel it. He said so therefore it had mass.
And that was like,
Um,
and they found that recently, didn't they? And I saw it on Facebook or something, one of these short reels where they're saying that science has proven that light has mass,
mm, yeah.
some
So he was
quantum level.
he's about 30 years ahead of the.
Wow. Was it the Scole group that created a ghost, if you like, where they created an entity, or was that something else?
I think that must be something else.
Yeah, I've read so much.
Yeah, they had. So they they had they one of the I think one of the scientists that was participating died,
Oh,
but then came through on the other side and instructed them to basically build this device with using germanium as a
well,
crystal as part of it. Um, it's very interesting. The some of the scientists they were taking photographs as well. It's worth a read is the book, and the photos section alone are quite unbelievable because they got Richard Wiseman, who's a well-known
yeah.
Professor Richard Wiseman. I can't remember which university he's at. He's a well-known skeptic. They got him to basically design, and I think he built the box that would contain the film. so it had a proper locking mechanism and all the rest of it. And they went to the sort of extent where they went to Hayes, because Kodak's film unit, manufacturing unit, was in Hayes, just outside London. They
Right.
would go there, they would pick up the film from there, they would put it in the box immediately, they would then close the box, lock it, they would hold the box for the duration of the seance, they would come out, get it developed, and they're just the images that came, they're just like, just so many images, and yeah,
Well,
just, yeah, so it's worth a read. Is Scole. It's one of my favourites, definitely, because it's just you just can't. It's not you can't easily explain it all away, and certainly stuff like that was done.
especially when they've put teams who are skeptical in there to try to prevent or
Yeah, they were
any
open minded, but
fraud.
very yeah, but yeah. So I mean, they were they had head of Cycle Society. David Fontana was part of that, but there were a number of other scientists. And then I think they invited a number of scientists, so long as they were open-minded and weren't
Yeah.
going to cause some major problem with the mediums, because they had double mediums, didn't they, in that
I don't
situation in
know a great
Skull?
deal about the Scole experiments. No.
Yeah,
Full circle.
yeah, they so they still, my understanding is those mediums still participate,
All right.
but they don't, not in the Skull. They just
No.
do some other projects,
Yeah.
but
They,
yeah, it was quite an extraordinary, probably some of the, certainly in terms of the modern world, because it was all done in the 1990s.
yeah.
Probably the some of the strongest phenomena done.
Right.
And they travelled everywhere as well. They went to California, and they
Yeah.
also went to Portugal, and they were able
And
to,
replicated the same
yeah,
situation. I think they eventually they tried to do it again in, was it France or Spain, that they were looking for funding and put out an appeal for funds.
yeah. Robin was did they found somewhere, didn't they? They did find
Yes.
somewhere, but
I'm not
I
sure
just
whether it was France or Spain. I can't remember.
Spain it was where
Spain, is it?
that's where he retired to. Was
All right. But he's crossed over now, hasn't he?
He has, yeah,
Yeah, I
a
thought I
couple of
did.
years ago, I think.
Yeah. So I suppose that ends it all now.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not. His wife hasn't. Certainly, I've not heard anything further since he died.
Yeah. You've been, because we're both interested in physical seances and like, you've been to others, haven't you? So the other gentleman I haven't seen work, Scott Milligan. Have you?
Yeah, I have. I think I've seen Scott about 3 times actually. Again, all down at the Banyan Retreat. Um, they always reached out to me during Christmas time. Banyan used to do a lot of sort of good work by donating lots of toys to children in hospitals and hospices. And so the idea was that basically you would turn up and you would bring a gift as well that could then be shared with a child. Um, so I was always happy to participate in there. Um, Again, I mean, I never got involved. Funny enough, I never got involved there with the checking the room. That always went to other people. Um, and but I have no doubt that they were operating on the same basis that they did, that first time I turned up. Um, there was so they used to put all the toys in the middle of the room of the room. It was a generally speaking, it seemed to be a smaller a smaller congregation as I recall. I don't think it was. We seemed to be a lot more tightly fit. The David Thompson one, there was a lot more people. There was a lot more room in the central room, less so. So you could, if you weren't careful with your feet, you could kick one of the toys or something like that. So you have to keep your feet tucked under the chair. Um, Again, they had a red light, but largely that was there um, for various reasons as such light, but not they weren't didn't move Scott around. So you would hear mainly it would be his guide would come through who was very very chirpy. I can't remember what his name is now, but yeah, very very chirpy individual. I I think they were a child. Is the way they came through. as his guide. Um, and Scott often knows that there were a lot of it was spirit children coming through.
Yeah.
So you would feel, well, essentially we were told were spirit hands on knees, ultimately. Obviously, same protocol. He was tied in to the chair. He was gagged, and just as tightly as David Thompson, if not sometimes tighter. I remember once. I remember they over timed it once, and he went. He kind of gave him like, "Hang on." So they, but he was in the chair. They again, everybody with no shoes, all that stuff. Or you had to take off your belt, watches, jewelry, keys, all the rest of it. Um, they did have trumpets in there, so there was a lot of trumpet action. Um, yeah, how given that how tight it was, and the fact that there were all these toys, these new toys and gifts in the middle, um, you'd have probably needed military grade night vision goggles to be able to avoid not treading on either somebody or a toy or something like that to do that
Yeah.
action, because the trumpets often went right out of the circle, and they went out so quickly as well.
Yeah.
Given that we were all sat and we were all holding hands, so you can't nobody can just burst through or something like that. It went around. We were explained that it was rod, ectoplasmic rod, that had that, and it just the way it moves around the room is just, yeah, just there's no way no way you could run around like that in your stocking feet. You'd
No.
slip
That was a
at some
blacked out
stage.
room, was it? Presumably then, is it?
It's the same room as before, so it's quite a
And
big
blacked
room,
out.
but we were kind of a bit of a smaller group, so we were all sort of moved to sort of one
Oh,
wall.
you're in closer because we were a smaller group, yeah. But it
Yeah,
was a blacked out room.
completely blacked
Yeah.
out.
But the trumpets have got luminous
They have,
tape
so you
on
can
them,
see
haven't
them
they? Yeah.
whizzing around. They've got the luminous tape on, and then you can hear, and then you can hear the children basically playing. So there'll be like xylophones and stuff like that. So they'll be playing on the xylophone or on a drum kit that little mini drum kit that somebody had brought, or you know, or you'd hear something opening, boxes opening. They were going in to get stuff.
Marvelous. Three occasions you saw, was it all the Christmas time for all three
It was
occasions?
always that time of year that I got invited back. So, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity.
No. So what
Um,
about the changes between the years then, each successive year? Was there any development changes?
I don't. I think it was very similar. It's very consistent, ultimately. And I'd have probably gone again, but obviously COVID came. That was probably my last. I think my last time. I think was 2019, December 2019. Um, so yeah, I think I think sometimes he would talk. They would allow him to talk, take the gag off him and stuff, and he would talk through what's going on.
Yeah,
There were a couple of times where um, I remember there was one occasion where he had quite a bad cold,
right.
but he still turned up, and they put the red light on because they'd give him a little bit of water and stuff to help him, but then they put the gag back on again. And he had a heavy cold. It was clear, very evident in his when you heard him, speak. Um, yeah, I mean, I probably learned a lot more about Scott after that, from various things I've seen on YouTube, interviews he's done,
Yeah,
and stuff. So he's quite an interesting character. He tells a really great story about how he was approached ultimately. It's the best way to put it, because he certainly wasn't looking to do this.
right. How was the approach then?
Well, literally, it's some lady turned up, basically parked next to him, and he was standing about. She wound down her window and said, "Are you Scott Milligan?" Which he said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "We need to talk." And apparently, he said, "How do you know who I am?" And it emerged that essentially they'd been given his name by spirit.
Well,
And yeah, it was
what the
like
hell?
it's quite it's a really it's a great story to listen to. That he tells it. There's a number of YouTube interviews out there where he tells us that tells the story.
Right. I've never
Um,
really looked into his background, I've got to be honest. But a
Yeah.
friend of mine, I didn't go, but a friend of mine who we used to sit with regular, and she was a bit more of a healer to start with. She went up to the same place on the borders that I went to with David Thompson, and everybody was going into the room. And as she was about to go into the room, massive amount of, oh, I think she might have gone in the room. Yeah, she was in the room, and she according to her, she foolishly offered to give whatever energy she could, um, more than you would normally give, because
Right.
she was this healer that things happened with her. And lo and behold, she had such a wallop of extraction of energy. She had such a reaction from having said, oh, yeah, I'll give it, and saw a big, either blue or purple light move out of her or something. But she was rendered pretty useless. And she had to be sent out of the room. I think there was two people who were sent out. And they thought, oh, well, we can still bring the chairs close to the room, to the door, sorry, from the antechamber. We can still sit close to the seance room and listen in, but she couldn't get near the door. She was
Right.
The energy pushed her away, made us feel so ill that
Right.
she just couldn't partake. But I've no doubt that she was genuine about it. I don't know
Mm.
really know what happened there,
Yeah.
or
So I
100% remember how she described it either. Unfortunately, so long ago.
yeah, it's clearly an experience that she had, and it was real to her, wasn't it? At the very
Yeah.
minimum, it was
So
real to her.
real to her, and transfer of energy of some kind that affect her energetically.
Mm.
How could that have been faked?
Well, would you want to fake it if you're going in anyway
No,
to
she
go into a
wanted a
seance?
witness.
There's a kind of question mark as to why you would
Why
do
would you
that, to
fake
not
that?
go into somewhere.
Yeah, and be rejected from the room. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you can come up with ideas, but their plausibility would be, yeah, you'd have to kind of question some of the plausibility about any hypothesis to why she wouldn't want to go into the room that she had travelled to go somewhere on. Yeah, I've only ever I know the medium I sat with, she I don't think she was I think she'd been overdoing it work wise
Right.
with the mediumship stuff, and she was working during the day as well. And she said she was coming home at lunchtime, sort of meditating and stuff like that. And I think she'd overdone it, and she wasn't well. And she was told by spirit that they were going to take it away from her for some time until they were satisfied that she built herself up and that
Yeah.
she needed to also look after herself better than she had done. And she said she was absolutely gutted to have it taken away. Felt, she was quite depressed by the fact that that it had been taken, that had been taken away from her. And I
Yeah.
think it was taken away for a fair few months. It wasn't like a few weeks. It was a fair few months, and probably maybe even half a year before she was then permitted to come back. Essentially,
Was that mental mediumship, or she working physically?
mental
Yeah.
mediumship. Yeah, yeah. She did some of the physical phenomena, which I'm trying to remember where I can't remember. I used to know this stuff really well, but whereby they channel obviously one of the guides ultimately, and it was a nun that would come through, and that was quite interesting. It was the first time I ever had that. I must admit I hadn't been in a circle for very long. I think it was just coming up to Christmas time, and I think it was actually the final one before Christmas.
So
And
was
I
it
remember
a home
sitting there.
circle?
Sorry.
Was it a home circle or
Home circle, yeah.
right?
And so the other people that were there were much more of Fey and had been going for much longer than I had. I was a newbie, and I must admit I didn't know how to kind of react to this, you know,
Yeah.
over there. And I remember the time in my mind thinking, God, can they see everything? Can they see everything? That was what was going through my mind. It's like kind of slightly panic actually. Oh my God, I've been having these thoughts. What about these thoughts or these thoughts? I don't want to really convey those.
No.
And I remember basically I remember that then they turned to me and said, "Don't worry, we only see what you basically want us to see." And I thought, Okay, that's pretty good because this has all been happening in my head.
Yeah, they
I
can.
thought, okay, well,
Oh,
there's obviously something going on here then. Yeah.
yeah. So how long did you sit in the home circle for development?
I think about 6 or 7 years.
And that was mainly mental mediumship.
Yeah, all mental
Yeah,
stuff, and yeah, and yeah, it was a real privilege to be invited to do that. Essentially, I just had a lot of demands on work at that time, and I had two quite young children still, and so in the end, I just couldn't. I couldn't keep up with it. Because it was quite a journey for me to go and it's an hour away for me essentially to go and join them and stuff like
yeah,
that. So
yeah. Time
yeah.
and place, 6 years is probably enough for that kind of thing anyway. But did you do table tilting there
We
in
did
that
one night.
circle?
We went to the so we went to the spiritualist. Uh, I think it was done in Spiritualist Church in Loughborough. Ultimately, because that's where she was.
Right.
Um, and yeah, full light. I must admit, if I'm honest, I was quite skeptical about the table tilting thing. I wasn't really sure about it. So they rolled out some trolleys, which was kind of like that caught my eye because I thought, oh, hang on, this is interesting. They're on wheels. they're
Yeah,
not they're not static legs. Ultimately, I
yeah.
thought, well, how's this going to work then? Um,
Like a
and they
weight,
were like sort of those trolleys you got from the 1970s and 1980s.
like a waitress drinks trolley
Yeah,
type.
yeah, yeah. They were sort of like so. And you couldn't lock the wheels or anything like that. They were they were clearly freewheeling, and the meet there were I think there were three mediums there that evening that were working with us, and they were sort of like this backwards and forwards, and then the trolley would come up, but we only had our hands on the very top of the trolley, sort of like with that sort of formica type plastic sort of top. So and it was all just fingertip work, just ultimately, and I was trying to get my head around how on earth essentially this trolley was staying put whilst it was on wheels
Yeah,
with only fingertip everybody with fingertips. I thought either somebody's got suckers on their fingertips, which is
yeah,
quite a phenomenon in its own right.
yeah,
Um, or there's something, there's something to this. There's something kind of interesting about this. So yeah, that was an intriguing. Yeah, and all obviously, as I say, full light, completely full light. Fluorescent
yeah,
light was on, so you could see everything that was going on.
yeah. Well, my first experience of a trolley, put your fingers on it and the trolley shot off. And you
Really?
had to run around the room to keep up with it. Yeah, first night in Treforest Church with Margaret, my wife. She wasn't my wife then. But to tilt that onto one side of it, or even to jump it up onto one set of wheels,
Mm.
that's quite difficult, isn't it? Especially if your hands are on top.
Yeah, I couldn't I couldn't get my head around it. I couldn't get my head around how I think there were about four of us around on it. Five if there were the initial medium, but the medium then would often come away
Yeah,
from there. So it was
take your
only
turns.
only
Yeah,
the four
everybody
of
takes
us.
a turn to leave the leave the
Yeah,
table, don't they? I can remember we were wanting levitations. We had our fingers on the top of a wooden table, and next thing you know, it's up there. And you think, how did it get up there? Oh no, I'm wrong about that. We had our fingers underneath
right.
because we wanted levitation. But even so, it was a surprise. How did it get up there?
Mm,
And then it would come down then on its own. The weight of it, you'd let it down. But how it got up there so easily, I don't know.
yeah.
'Cause it went up uniformly. If one person was pushing it up, wouldn't it? He would have tilted it, wouldn't he? I'm not.
Yeah, and definitely in my experience, in the experience I had, all hands on the top. They weren't, there were handles on the side. Nobody was on the handles. It was on the flat, like I say, formica sort of surface
Yeah, yeah.
on there. So there was, and it was just fingertips.
That's probably a metal trolley as well, wouldn't it? I would imagine they usually were.
It was wooden
Oh,
essentially.
right.
It was kind of wooden. It's
Maybe it's
like
a bit
a kind of
older
it
than.
was
Yeah,
teak effect or something to that
yeah.
sort of style.
Oh,
Yeah.
God, yeah, yeah. Well, at least it. But having said that, the wheels wouldn't have been wood. They would have been
No,
metal
they were metal. They were kind of, those ball wheels that
casters.
probably
Yeah,
got
or
that
ball.
tiny,
Yeah,
with the rubber sort of outside piece, and they're on casters as well.
Masters, yeah. So that takes away all this. You can't have metal in a physical seance room because physical happens regardless when
Well, in the end, there are the ports, aren't there, that with metal objects and stuff like that. So I suspect that often the metal thing probably is just maybe it's just to kind of one protection of the medium, two is possibly even protection of the people that are in there, just because of the energy that's bouncing around, and they want to kind of control that and make
yeah.
sure it's not.
So with Scott, you didn't see a full form materialization as such, like spirit walking around a room, or as they talk
No,
about.
we were just
Oh,
aware of the children
yeah,
ultimately. That was what we were told, and they would whisper. There was lots of whispering
yeah,
and stuff, and there was multiple. It wasn't just one child. It was definitely multiple children that were, and they were clearly low down.
yeah.
They
Now
were they were
Banyan,
smaller than even when I was sitting. They were smaller than me.
yeah. Well, Banyan Retreat is quite famous or infamous, whichever way round you want to look at it.
Yeah, they had that. Although, in fairness to them, I mean, obviously that infamity is just due to one individual, isn't
Yeah,
it?
of course it
Really,
is. Yeah, which
and
was
but I
it's on YouTube. You can see the
they
event.
called it, didn't they? They made the call.
Yeah, they put it. It's out there, and it's with the medium was Gary Mannion, and feel these spirit breezes, and then the video showed that it was him with his shirt off, waving his shirt around.
Yeah,
Now, the spirit do control the mediums. They do move them out of the cabinet. So that's fair comment that he could have been in a deep trance and moved out of the cabinet. But what it seemed to be happening there was that he was palming off physical phenomena
mm.
as the spirit world creating it, whereas it was physically him creating it.
Yeah. I think for me, I'd always have question marks about if I was going to go and see something like that, and in clearly in pitch black, if the medium is not prepared to be tied to the chair. And my understanding is that Gary was not prepared to be tied to the chair, hence why he was able to get up and walk around and do
Yeah,
which in some respects kind of gives some credence to the other
yeah.
mediums that did have themselves tied to the chair, because it sort of demonstrates that actually it's really difficult.
It might be difficult for a human to get out of it being tied into a chair, cable
Yeah,
tied chains, bootlaces, you name it, except for cotton.
yeah.
I might come back to that in a moment. But it's not difficult for the spirit world to get them out of restraint.
No, no, because I know Stuart Alexander. They I know I read Leslie Keane's account. Leslie Keane is a journalist of the Washington Post. She was invited. Um, I think she had not long had a bereavement of losing her brother, and I think she had an interest in. So she had an interest. There was an interest there, but I think she managed to get this invitation to go and sit with Stuart Alexander's circle, and he's probably in current or most recent times, because I don't think he does anything
Yeah.
outside of Home
That's-
Circle anymore.
yeah.
He's probably singularly probably one of the most interesting and uh, mediums physical phenomena. And I think she has his hand or something like that. And the spirit war says, we're going to, are you okay if we pull his hand through the tie? And she says yes. And so they do straight through the tie. And then they put it back down. And I think Stuart Alexander also ended up in another room.
Well,
I'm sure there's an account of that. And then obviously there's been a lot of that phenomena with the wax
yeah,
gloves as well with him.
yeah,
And the interesting thing there is Leslie Keane said that it was all done under red light. So whilst it was dim, she said it was clear what you could see.
yeah,
Your eyes grew accustomed quite
yeah.
quite quickly to the dim light, but you could see what was going on.
Was that
To
boiling hot
see a
wax or was it cold wax?
hot wax, is my understanding.
Yeah, because there is a cold wax as well that could be used,
Yeah.
apparently. Yeah, they are phenomenal. It's like where they put their hands like this and then dip it into the wax. Spirit people must put their hands in, not,
Mm.
not the human hand.
Yeah, yeah. So
So the
spirit.
spirit's hands are like this, into the wax. Then the spirit disappears. Wax cools down, leaving the hole, which they then fill with plaster.
Yeah.
Because they've created a mold. They're quite impressive, they are, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it was. I think that was originally done by I think a Belgian scientist who was interested in that and did some work with a particular physical medium back in I think in the early 1900s. And I think I think there's a university or a museum actually has the still has those plaster casts
Yeah,
of those hands. And I
yeah,
think they were judging by the people that were in the room, and it was like really obvious that it wasn't anybody else's hand because they were like they were very slender and small hands.
amazing, yeah. Going back to Banyan then, when the Gary Mannion affair took place, the union and the Banyan Retreat and other people, other interested parties, got together and they came out with a protocol, which I think I've described on a previous video.
Mm.
Scott Milligan was working in AFC at the time, and this protocol was supposed to apply to blacked out seances in Union Church or AFC Union premises, basically. And there was a bit of a fuss over Scott then leaving the AFC because he wouldn't do it. But I've since heard that, well, Scott said, let's get together and let's discuss this and work out what we can do.
Mm.
And they didn't take him up on it. So I think somebody created suspicion over Scott about that, leaving the AFC the way he did.
I had no, and all the events that I attended with Scott, I never had any reason to think that he had in any way been able to get out of the chair.
No, I'm 100% convinced that you've got to listen to his side of that story about leaving the AFC at that time,
Mm.
not just what's come through on the public domain from the other side. I think you've definitely got to hear both sides of the story on that one,
Yeah.
because I don't think there's it was exactly cut and dried as it's come out.
No, I don't think so either. Paul. I think,
I'm pretty sure that he's offered, to work with them, and
yeah,
was never taken up. So he had to walk away. But he's back there now, so that's proof of the pudding, isn't it?
yeah. It sounds like there was. I mean, it could be just simply basically a communication issue and people's understanding about what's required, not required, and so therefore what was needed was basically a conversation and to everybody to clarify what those rules meant and ultimately so that everybody could then understand them correctly.
Yeah. With your scientific hat on, then, what was the union talking about then with these protocols? Were they talking about bulbs, infrared bulbs, or were they talking about military grade night vision?
Yeah, so I'm not. I hasten to just point out I'm not an expert in these, but my understanding is essentially on the technology. There's two fundamental types. One is that the technology requires an additional light source such as infrared, which human eye can't see in its purest form, but that sends out obviously a light over the area and therefore either infrared film or a sensor in a camera that is being designed for infrared can pick that up and can see everybody. And it usually you often see that black and white sort of imagery in that situation. The other type is whereby essentially it's more about the infrared and the thermal combination that's being
Yeah,
emitted and
right.
the sensors. And this is where your kind of military grade sort of technology comes in because the guys that are wearing those goggles obviously can't go around shining an infrared torch. They need something that picks up that that piece. And so I think some of it used to be just purely infrared, but I think they kind of use a combination of the thermal imaging as well in relation to that, so they get a better image. But it's passive rather than an active
Right.
type
So the passive
approach.
type shouldn't be of any problem whatsoever then. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely, because then you're not because you're only dealing with the infrared energy, the light essentially that's already present within the room. You're not introducing anything new. And again, I think that ultimately it is we know that in the past, we were talking obviously about, Minnie Harrison, for instance, in the past there has been introductions of basically of infrared type light in the past and also dim red, and we know that in home circle people do operate in red light, dim red light, and I think David Thompson in his home circle has operated with a dim red light.
Right.
Um, I'm pretty sure that I've heard that or read something about that, but he only does it in the home circle.
Yeah, it's more controlled there, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think so. I think that that's probably for mediums that are all Robin. I was quite like Robin Foy because Robin Foy saw himself as a scientific spiritualist, didn't he? Sort of, and I think that was a good way of. I think that's a way I probably look at myself to a certain extent. To me, it's about yeah, that's what you should pursue ultimately. Is it's not just about the messages, but also about you know push it, helping spirit push the boundaries.
Yeah,
Taking that out. I appreciate there are certain situations whereby for the protection of the medium, you may not wish to do that.
yeah. Well, in fairness, it is their life, their body. They put their life on the line.
Absolutely.
They should have the final say in what they're going to accept by way of intrusions, by way of infrared or passive
Yep.
or not. And I think that's only fair. Uh, there's always the fraud angle, though, and we've had one medium in the room behind that wall.
It's always been a factor, though, Paul,
Yeah,
throughout the ages. I mean, I think I can't remember the lady's name, but I think she was Italian. Eusapia or something or other, I think was her name.
yeah, you
I
say
remember she's really famous. She was famous for being oddly quite a good medium, but at
yeah,
the same time, she would tell everybody, "Well, you have to be careful, make sure I don't catch you out and stuff like that." I think Oliver Crooks was there, who was what the scientist at the time,
yeah,
and there was another guy, and they literally wrapped their legs around her legs around the chair and stuff like
yeah,
that to make sure that she couldn't do anything.
yeah. Well, I think it was her that they knew her tricks. They loved the fact that she had some of the certain frauds that she could perpetuate. Uh,
Yeah, because
but
obviously
that
it
once they'd
limits,
taken
doesn't
them,
it?
yeah,
What
once
you
they,
look for in others.
yeah. Well, apart from that, well, once she'd gone through her repertoire of tricks, and she never expanded on what she brought to the table in the first instance. So once they'd identified all her tricks and how she did them, everything else they knew was genuine phenomena.
Yeah.
So they were quite amazed by her. That was
Yeah,
Eusapia
Eusapia Palisedo or something like
Palladino
that,
or
wasn't it?
something like that. I got the book
Yeah.
with it. Yeah. No, 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 but this medium we had come back twice. I didn't see the second one. First one was interesting, but there was loud music and there was a statement at the beginning, if anybody tries to touch a spirit form or whatever, the ectoplasm will rush back into me and I'll throw this huge wooden cabinet that he created into the room. It's only a small room, 18 people in there would have killed somebody.
Yeah.
But he's saying that at the beginning, so nobody touches it. But I felt a ranging touch on my leg, and I was sitting in front of everybody else because I was the odd number. I didn't think that was spirit. I did not think that was a spirit touch. And there was the smallest person to my right. It's all pitch black. And we were all on patio style plastic chairs. When they put the lights on eventually, that girl was sitting in front of me. And neither of us had any perception whatsoever that she'd
Hmm.
been moved there. But she had some perception of something. She said I could smell BO. But other than that, she didn't even know she'd been lifted up. So I
Right.
thought that was quite amazing. Myself and a friend who we organised it, we tried to move a plastic chair on these laminate wooden floors that I laid down, and I don't lay, I did. It was a cheaper floor, and I didn't lay it very well. So every time that it comes to a join, the plastic chair hit the join and bounced. You could not move it smoothly; it was impossible. and neither of us could move it with anybody sitting in it. You
Right.
know, there was a girl sitting in that chair throughout. She didn't. She said she didn't stand up. So that was interesting. But the third time we said, yeah, you can come back again. But this time we want to tie cotton around your forearms. We want to know for sure whether you're out of the chair yourself. You wouldn't come back.
Hmm.
There we are. It is what it is.
Yeah, it is, and I think, and for me again, so the obviously the physical phenomena is really interesting, stuff like that. But going back to that original case with particularly with David Thompson, and I think it may have happened a couple of times with Scott as well. Is was when that young man came through for his mother and sister, and they recognised his voice, and they clearly recognised the voice. They were very, as I say, very emotional. It was an extraordinarily emotional situation. There was clearly
Yeah,
no doubt in their mind.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
know you cannot say, well, they're built up, they're hoping. Well, yeah, but then you've got to know his name.
yeah,
And he was clearly sharing stuff with them that they knew.
yeah.
Well,
Personal
that's
information. Yeah,
yeah. It's not that I can assure you, right? Because of some of the stuff I do, it's not easy to go and get that information. Web scraping, even the commercial tools that are available to go and get that kind of some of these poignant pieces of detail is extraordinary. Is actually really difficult. Not to mention, actually, we'd be breaking the law in certain situations. I think sometimes, I mean, that there's no doubt about it. A good mental mediumship is can be every bit the equal of a physical phenomena. And anybody who wants to have a look at the SNU centenary and Gordon Higginson's demonstration in 1990, the information that he shares is extraordinary. I understand, which is a shame, obviously, because she died many, many decades ago now. But I understand Estelle Roberts was particularly good, and I understand that Winston Churchill knew her and
all
even
right.
took her into Parliament. She gave a demonstration in Parliament. I don't think it was to the whole of Parliament. I think it was to a select few ultimately during the Second World War. Ultimately there, but yeah, there is some. I know even when I sat in my circle, there were things that some of the things that were given to me by my fellow circle members. There was some interesting piece of information. I just thought, yeah, that would be very difficult to guess.
But yeah, I think we've covered about everything, haven't we?
I think so. I think so.
Anything ongoing at all?
No, no, just like probably a lot of people, I just survey the YouTube piece. I mean, I hope one day to probably certainly get back into a mediumship circle. Probably not right now, but maybe in a few years' time, once I've got all my children off to higher education, and I've got some time back, and yeah, but obviously I'm always open. I'm always looking for just in case there's an opportunity for a physical seance or even good mental mediumship. Certainly always willing to participate in those events.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Warren. It's been a
You're welcome.
fabulous chat, very interesting,
Indeed,
and
indeed,
highly illuminating and educational.
indeed.